All right. Hey, James, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm not doing too bad. Haven't seen you in a while, pal.
Yeah, it's been a while since we recorded one of these, but here we go. We're back at it, and hopefully we got some nice golden nuggets.
Oh yeah. Oh, actually, of course we do. We're guaranteed some golden nuggets because you've been very prolific recently, writing a couple more blog posts.
Oh, yes, trying at least.
Let's talk about unknown generalizations, I guess first.
Okay.
That one's a little bit shorter, right?
Yeah, that's a shorter one. The reason why I'm doing it like this, I'm trying to follow in Annie Matuszak's footsteps. There we go. There's the mention. Where each of these notes are atomic, because I want to be able to build a complex structure with each of the notes being able, like their own encapsulated thing.
Okay.
So if you read the notes together, it builds a big picture, and each individual piece, which is each of the articles or the notes, contributes to that. And that came out of a recent note-taking practice that I've been using, which is not traditional note-taking. It's like what Annie Matuszak talks about, or that Zettelkasten system where it's supposed to help you think better. And for me, it's absolutely done that. And I kind of did it out of necessity because I felt like all of my progress in terms of my thinking about formulation and generalizations, it all kept being erased because I was not keeping track of my thoughts and my ideas. So whenever I would make a breakthrough in my mind, I would not capture it on paper or in any kind of system. So I would just lose it. And I was never actually making progress. And I just got so upset at this because I've been trying to implement a consistent note-taking system for ages, but I haven't done it. And now I just need to do it. Otherwise, I'm not going to make progress. So these blog posts and this one on generalization and the next one, they're all going to be in a series of things that come out of a note-taking practice to help me think better about these things and advance my ideas and not reset every single time because I keep forgetting the ideas. So anyway,
Exactly.
that's the whole point of this.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we talked about it the other day that it's important to have some sort of note-taking practice so you can compound your ideas over time rather than them just decaying with your memory, Because often when you have a good idea, you think that you'll remember it over time because it's very clear to you in that moment, but a lot of your ideas will just decay like any other piece of information that you try and learn. So it is important, I think, to have some sort of note-taking system. And so the first of these articles that came out recently was your one called Unknown Generalizations Are Less Applicable. So can you summarize it for us?
Yeah, so I've noticed a problem within myself, and other people do this too, where you'll listen to an expert speak of something, and they will say what is actually a generalization, but you think it's an interesting piece of information to learn, so you take it on, and you act as if you now have earned that generalization. And by earned, I mean generalizations are supposed to be the result of a deeper study, and a generalization comes out of that. So you learn a bunch of facts, and you go, oh, here's a generalization to summarize all of these facts that I've learned, right? So that would be what it looks like to earn a generalization. You've put in the effort to learn the underlying information that then results in a generalization. So the notion I'm putting forward is that when you take on an unearned generalization, which is to say, I give you a generalization that I earned, and then you just take the generalization itself and act as if you earned it, right? And I don't mean that in a malicious way. People just do this innocuously. But when you act as if you've earned an unearned generalization, you assume that you will get the applicability that the original earner got. But it's really not true. And in the post I gave this example, there's this doctor who writes books, and he's a very good doctor. His name is Eric Topol, and he wrote a book on AI in medicine. And I had listened to a podcast episode on Sam Harris, and he was on there, and he had mentioned that IBM's Watson, the supercomputer that they built to play Jeopardy, well, it wanted to do more than play Jeopardy. It wanted to, be a doctor replacement in a kind of way, help with diagnoses, this kind of thing.
Okay.
And I had heard him say, oh, well, Watson failed miserably. It didn't really, it's still not good at medicine, even a decade later, and it didn't really work out. And so Watson sucks, it failed at being a doctor. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting information. but I didn't know why it failed. I didn't know in what way it failed. I didn't know what approach they took. I didn't know if they were going to abandon the project, if they were going to take a different approach, or if other people were taking different approaches and having better success, or if there's something inherently difficult about the problem they were trying to solve, or the general progress of AI in medicine, or any of these things, which Eric Topol himself would have known. But the problem is, I assumed that I would know these things because I stole this generalization, and I just go, oh, that's interesting information. I'll just have that for myself, and I'll be able to, use this in a fruitful way. But it's actually not true. That's the problem with generalizations.
Very nice. Yeah, I really like the phrase unearned generalizations and earned generalizations as well. I see a lot of people using it in the Discord now. I've heard it come up in conversation. It's like it's funny how fast these sort of things spread. But yeah, I really like this post. It's short, but it encapsulates a lot of really important information about generalizations and abstractions and everything. So one thing I noticed was like, basically when you have a generalization isn't really like an individual thing. It's more like a network, because the difference between you reading that generalization from Dr. was it Topol, maybe? Topol?
Yeah.
Yeah, you reading that generalization, it's like, because perhaps it's on something that you don't know a whole lot about, it's just like an orphan piece of knowledge that isn't relatable to any of your prior knowledge. So it sort of exists in a sphere on its own inside your mind. But perhaps to the doctor, his generalization is more like a bundle of generalizations all related to each other somehow. So he has like this structure in his mind where that one generalization just occupies one single like node in a bigger network, all connected together.
I say in the article, the generalization acts merely as an anchor for his knowledge and reasoning about things like current AI in medicine and those kinds of things. So I view it as kind of an anchor. It's like a starting point. It helps you keep everything together. It's something to attach the raw facts to.
Yeah. It made me think about just learning in general and the difference between semantic and rote or asemantic learning. And like sort of like the difference is that if you learn something and it's not relatable to your prior knowledge in any way, then it's rote, right? Because you can't relate it in any way to anything you already know. So it's kind of just sitting there on its own in your mind, and you can't relate it to anything. But when you have a generalization, an earned generalization, it's more like semantic learning, where you can relate it to your prior knowledge in some sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the core problem is a lot of people are assuming that they can get good learning by capturing the generalizations of others because of the earned words. I'm tempted to say stealing, but obviously it's not meant in a negative way like that. But in a way, it's like you're not really gaining much value. I mean, I suppose it's okay to steal someone else's generalization if you're also doing the work, and maybe you go further than they can because you're able to take what they had in a way. So it's just faster progress for you, or you end up in a different place. I don't know about that. I haven't done enough deep thinking, but yeah, I've just noticed this pattern in myself, and I've mentioned this before, but this goes along with another game that I play in my own mind, which is, spot the generalization. Oftentimes I think the difficulty in making items is when you're trying to make items from a generalization that you don't realize is a generalization. You know what I mean? Like, you might be reading a biography of somebody. This happened to me. This is why I'm bringing this example. You might be reading a biography of somebody, and it kind of starts out by saying, such and such was a kind-hearted person and everyone knew it, right? You might think that's not a generalization, but it is. That's a generalization the authors made. They've looked at all this person's life events, and they go, oh, wow, they tend to be a kind person, and people tend to think of them as a kind person. But that's a generalization across all those facts. And so this relates because I think a lot of people have difficulty making good items, and I think some of that difficulty comes from trying to make items from a generalization that you don't yet realize is one. So this unearned generalizations thing goes along with that mental game I play.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, it's difficult, especially when you're a beginner, to know when it's like safe. You know, it's silly to say safe. If it's safe to take a generalization, because you don't know whether it's a generalization from like 99% of cases are like this, so we make this generalization because it covers 99%, or if it's a generalization that only covers like 60%. And knowing the distinction between those two requires a lot of time in the field, or someone to tell you, like an expert to tell you, okay, you're safe learning this because it covers 999 out of 1,000 possible, choices or whatever.
Right, yeah, exactly. And you can't, in a lot of ways, you can't know that in advance. And as you say, as you get better at learning itself and spotting these different things, you can have some sense of, okay, this one is okay. I don't need to know the details of it. As long as I just have the result of someone else's thinking here, that will be enough in this case. But in a lot of cases, that's not true. So it's important to continually sense that and think of all these things. And I was also thinking of it in when you're incremental reading. There's all kinds of self check-ins you have to perform about things like your energy levels and your comprehension and your enjoyment and these kinds of things. And to me, this generalization type of stuff is maybe just another one of those self check-ins. Like, why am I finding difficulty in making items here? Those kinds of things. And I'm trying to do a lot more writing about that and what makes items difficult to formulate well and those kinds of things. And I also want to do more thinking about what is the real utility of a generalization, assuming, like, if you do the learning of something and then you derive a generalization and then you forget the facts but you remember the generalization.
Yeah.
You earned it, but is the value still there in some sort of ineffable way? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a
because
good point.
I don't know. I mean, most people don't use SRS, so they don't remember all the facts. But they do remember a lot of generalizations, Like Eric Topol, I'm quite sure, in some years, probably wouldn't be able to recall all of the reasons he came to the conclusion, oh, Watson sucks at being a doctor, I'm sure of that. Well, at least I'm pretty sure of it, unless he's actively reviewing that information. But I'm sure he'll remember the generalization. And so, does it still maintain its utility? And I want to do more thinking about that, because right now I'm kind of thinking of generalizations as an anchor point, sort of like an entry point for all of your information about that. And it's a unitized, packeted up bundle of your information, like you say, that helps you reason in real time without having to think of all the individual facts. But it's still supported by those facts.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting topic because you can go so deep with it, because it ties directly to, like, what is knowledge? How do we know about the world and that sort of thing? So it can get really metaphysical and stuff. And yeah, I feel like you're making a distinction between facts and generalizations, but I wonder if everything can be considered as a generalization in some sense. It's yeah, I don't know. Maybe I need to just do some more deep thinking. It's difficult to express. But yeah,
a lot of these topics are really difficult to express. That's why, dude, if anybody's listening to this and you don't have a note-taking practice, I've been saying for years, just kind of parroting this back, oh, note writing helps you think. Writing helps you think. Writing helps you think. I've just been saying that. I've heard people say that so many times. But I had never fully committed to a good note writing practice, so I was never experiencing it myself, but I kept parroting this back. But it really is true. I now see so clearly, and it was bothering me actually, because I want to represent in items what my experience has been like, but I'm struggling to do it. But now I see so clearly that note-taking is thinking, and it can actually help you think so much more clearly. So if you're listening to this and you don't have a note-taking practice to actually help advance your thinking and not erase all of your progress on your problems you're trying to solve, it could be any problem, then I highly recommend that you start taking notes in some form, and it would be extremely fruitful for pretty much everybody, I think. But anyway, I want to do some more deep thinking about this generalization stuff.
Yeah. I was just thinking then, like, obviously, like, the whole purpose of generalization is to basically save energy or save space in your mind, because it's so costly to remember. It's much more costly to remember every instance of a generalization, rather than just the generalization itself. And I feel like as humans, we always have we're always sort of pushing towards getting the most for our energy or whatever. We're trying to save as much energy expenditure, because the brain obviously uses so much of our metabolic resources. It's something like a quarter. So I feel like we tend to generalize so much just because it's really efficient. But also, what you're saying about whether Dr. Tobel would remember the particular instances as well and the facts, I think maybe he would, just because when you have these generalizations and they're very stable in your mind, you can sort of have facts that gain stability in your mind by their relation to a certain generalization, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So almost by having lots of generalizations, you're able to cling on to more of the particular things as well, just because they're related to the generalization, which is much easier to remember.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, and it relates to something we've talked about before about, each individual item that you review, although it might be atomic in itself, it's helping hold up some kind of background structure. So maybe the generalization is the structure, and the items obviously reinforce that every time you review it. Because although you think you're just reviewing that item, maybe you're also reviewing the generalization and increasing its stability. So especially if you use SM combined with generalizations, I think that's golden.
Beautiful. Yeah. Let's sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually gonna transfer on to the next one, because it really relates to something you said about conserving energy. Because the reason I wrote this next article, Formulation Fun, this series of articles will be basically exercises for myself to deliberately practice my formulation skills. And it relates to what you were saying, because it came out of, it's an obvious thing to say now, that the brain, if you repeat a behavior sufficient number of times, it pretty much gets transferred to the background, so you don't have to think about it. And so I wanted to deliberately practice formulation to such a degree that even intense thinking about it, like the thinking that went into this article, is transferred to the background, and I can just see information, and my brain just does this. I had this experience. I'm pretty good at Sudoku puzzles, and like when I was 15 or something, I just really wanted to get good at these Sudoku puzzles. So I would do a few of them every day, and eventually I just got so good at the Sudoku puzzles. I think I beat the official world record. I don't have the world record. But what I could find, and the world record for an easy Sudoku puzzle, I beat that record. I have the record for Sudoku puzzle. And that's not a brag. I honestly think anybody could do it. It's a very easy thing to do. But what surprised me about it was that when you start doing Sudoku puzzles, it takes 10 or 15 minutes. And every number you get, you're having to think through it. You're having to process and go, those numbers are there, so it can't go here, and all this, right? It takes time. It takes conscious effort. And what started to happen to me was, over time, after doing a sufficient number of Sudoku puzzles, I would look at a Sudoku puzzle, and I would just know where a bunch of the numbers were. I couldn't even feel any processing. I would just look at it, and I could just see, that's where the numbers go. I couldn't tell you what happened there. I don't know the procedures that went into it, but something happened in the brain where it moved those conscious processes to the background so I could think about other stuff. I could have a chat while I'm doing a Sudoku puzzle, all that stuff. And I think anybody can do that. I'm really not trying to brag. It's not a great skill. It's not a cool party trick to be able to do a Sudoku puzzle really fast. But I want to do the same thing with item formulation. So I can produce really, really high quality items that are well thought out in the background. I don't want to have to go through all this thinking, because one of the things I was concerned about with this article was, and if you have any questions about it, I'm sure the people listening would have similar questions, so you could ask those. But one of the things I was concerned with this article was people would think that I go through this conscious thinking process every time, and that's not true. Much of this stuff is automated. I just noticed, whatever, the phrasing is too complex here, and I just rephrase it in a way that comes automatically to me. I'm not doing conscious thinking of this. But I want to make that even more severe. I want to make it so I can produce even higher quality items that are even more abstract, even more atomic. Obviously, you can't be more atomic or less, but you know what I mean. And I want to see how far I can take that. And these articles are a deliberate attempt to practice item formulation deliberately. Obviously, I don't meet all the standards of deliberate practice because I don't have a coach. I wish I had an item formulation coach. Eventually it'll happen. I have faith that eventually, one day, this will be so popular that there will be item formulation coaches, just like there are people that teach people to write and all kinds of things like that.
That's awesome. Maybe in the year 2070, they'll look back at us and think, how did they manage without their formulation coaches?
Yeah, exactly. How did they do it?
No, I really
Anyway,
like this,
so that's the goal of these articles.
Okay. Yeah, awesome. I mean, I can't wait for it to become a series. I really like the first one.
Thank you.
So, one of the first, I think it's the first paragraph or so, I really like this because you start off just by making the relationships between the different concepts and objects within that. I think it was 2 sentences apart from Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. You just pull it apart and make all of the relationships between the different bits of the sentence as obvious as possible. Because when you rearrange and rewrite sentences like that to make the relationships explicit, it makes them a lot easier to formulate as items. And that sort of made me think about different kinds of writing and how relationships between concepts and objects are expressed in different types of writing. And so at one end of the spectrum, there's like mathematics, which is literally like a method of quantifying relations between objects, mathematical objects in maths. And then on the other side of it, there's like literary writing, where you're expressing relationships between people, characters, sort of more complex, implicit relationships that are expressed over paragraphs rather than in an atomic formula like in maths. But yeah, I started to think a lot about relationships and how relationships between concepts and like encoding them in an item is essentially what we're doing when we're doing SRS.
Yeah, that's the way I was kind of thinking of it, because one of the issues that I see people have is that they view the writing as somehow the writing to me doesn't matter. All I care about is the ideas being expressed. Yeah. If I can capture the ideas, I'll reword it any way I want. I'll get rid of anything extra. All I care about is the ideas and the relationship. So if I can strip away any excess stuff that was written that doesn't contribute to those pieces, then I'm fine with doing that. And I think one of the difficulties people have with making items is that they treat it like they have to remember the particulars of the phrasing, when in reality that's not what the point is. You want to remember the relationships between things. And that's one of the reasons I decided to break it up in the way that I did, was to just simplify it and say, here's the things that this is saying, and not anything extra, And this was a particularly easy example because there wasn't too much extra in it to begin with. But I want to increase the difficulty there and add a bunch of extra stuff. Hopefully I can tackle certain philosophical ideas and these kinds of things and try and break that up in a similar way and just capture the relationships, because that's the only part that matters. When you're talking about making items, that is all that matters. The relationships, the associations between concepts and ideas, that's it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. Like, there are lots of things that aren't essential to the relationships that might be in the sentence. So just extra words that are added for that sort of change the meaning of the sentence in a way that doesn't influence the nature of the relationship between concepts or objects. That weirdly, it reminded me of something I read in my just incremental reading. Just something about the mathematician Leibniz. He had this idea for a new language that was going to be like totally concept based, and it would sort of be like maths. So you'd just express relations between ideas using this sort of math-like language, and the idea was that anything you said would be able to be checked, sort of like a proof checker in math or whatever. And so you wouldn't be able to, any argument would just be reduced to solving a couple of formulas, and then you'd know who was right and who's wrong, or something like that. Obviously it hasn't.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it hasn't come to fruition yet, but maybe in the future. But yeah, it's funny.
Oh, if only.
Sometimes I do like use symbolizations. Yeah, that sounds stupid. I'll use symbols in place of words to make things more terse, more abstract, and just like simpler to read. Like sometimes when the hint of a close item is increases or decreases, I'll just write plus minus. You know, and I'll use that same.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, I'll use plus minus for high, low, bigger, smaller, because they all represent the same, just the same difference between big and large, small.
Right.
I'm not explaining it very well, but you know what I mean intuitively.
I know exactly what you mean. And what's weird is I've never thought of that even one time. So that's very interesting. I might try that. Yeah, that's a very interesting idea.
Yeah. I've been. I thought a while ago about adding more of those symbols, but I don't know. I guess back then, the reason I didn't do it was because I wanted to share like my items, and I thought that by adding in all of these symbols, it makes it much more difficult to share items with other people. But I guess now I'm less concerned with that, just because my ideas regarding the value of items and sharing them with others just changed. I don't think it's as useful to share those sorts of items, but so maybe I'll add more of these weird wacky symbols.
Yeah, I noticed I was playing around in the advanced English collection because I wanted to get some ideas about formulation, and they use all kinds of abbreviations for things. Like they're not symbols explicitly, but they're kind of like symbols in that they're just a shorter way to transfer the information. Like, you know, this is like something is STH or whatever, or you know, they have all kinds of abbreviations like that. So yeah, I think developing a shorthand for yourself, and especially with symbols like that, that's really smart. And I also think it makes the items more applicable because increases, decreases is more of a hint than plus minus, I think.
Yeah.
Like, at least the way I conceptualize it. So, anyway, that's very interesting. But, yeah, I think another reason I broke these up is because, and we alluded to this already, have you ever heard that Kent Beck quote? Make the change easy, then make the easy change.
I've not heard that quote, but it is good.
Yeah, it's about coding. He's a programmer, and I think he's written some refactoring books. Okay. And the idea relates to refactoring. You know, make the change easy, then make the easy change. And it's obviously, and I think he even says in the original tweet, you know, this will be hard or something. Like, after he says make the change easy, he says this will be hard, right? And that'll be hard. But once you make the change easy, then you make the easy change. And I felt the same way about these items. I was making the change easy. I was making it easy to make the items by rephrasing these things and pulling these ideas apart. And then everybody would look at those and go, oh, those are easy items to make. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what I think. I think it's possible to do that with all information. And I want to really get good at that and convey that idea to people.
Yeah. So just step one, refactor it to make the relationships explicit. Then you start making your items, and it'll be a lot easier.
Right, exactly. And when all the relationships are made explicit in clear, plain language, then it's really easy for you to pick, oh, here's what I want to learn from this, or here's what I don't care about. And because I think that's one of the other major problems that people have with formulation. It's like, how do I formulate this, right? People will say that all the time. And I go, well, what do you want to learn? And they go, I don't know. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with formulation, because you're not being very clear about what you want to learn. So how can you expect to make items when you don't even know what you want to make items of? So I think that's another utility. It removes that difficulty of deciding what you want to learn, because all of the relationships and all the relevant concepts are being made really clear in plain language, no excess terms. You can see the associations. You can say, I pick this one, I pick that one. This holds it together like glue. Here we go. And it's very easy to make items.
Precisely, yeah. Okay, so now let's say we've gone through the refactoring process. We've got these reformulated sentences that we want to remember. Now, one thing I noticed, which was really interesting, was there's an example here. So the question is, the amygdala deals with... wait 1 second. We do know... Yeah, the amygdala... It was like, the question is, the amygdala, the part of the brain, deals with automatic/deliberative processing. So the question is does it deal with automatic or deliberative processing? And one thing you said is, we don't know whether the old brain regions, so like the amygdala, we don't know whether they deal exclusively with automatic processing, or whether they might have other, functions as well. So you can't make that item. You can't make the item because it might be false. And the reason it's false is because the cardinality of the relationship is ambiguous. There could be potentially like a one-to-many relationship between the amygdala and things it deals with. So rather than just having either automatic or deliberative processing, it could also be responsible for a whole bunch of other functions. So it has a relationship like between itself, one, and many, like the functions that it could carry out.
Exactly.
Right. So if you had made that item, it would be like a massive overgeneralization to say that it only deals with either automatic or deliberative processing. And so, the whole point it's really hard to explain that. I bet people listening are just going to be like, what the fuck? What was he talking about?
No, I think guys, people get it. They'll get it. They're smart people.
Skip back a couple of minutes, open the article, read it at the same time. I was talking about that. It's just this whole thing about the cardinality, because you can have like one-to-one relationships and one-to-many relationships. And when you have a one-to-many relationship, you have to be really careful about how you formulate the item, because when there are many different answers to a single question, then it's really difficult to remember that over time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. You have to notice what's being said, and I think that's another advantage of making everything clear. Put it in plain language, make the associations clear, make the concepts clear. Then you'll see what's actually being said, and you can know what items you can make and what items you can't. And one of the curious points there to me was, not only do you have to be careful there, but when you are careful, it reveals to you almost in a procedural way where the holes in your knowledge are. So theoretically, if you are making these items, you could go, oh, I don't know whether the amygdala deals exclusively with automatic processing or whether it also deals with deliberative processing. You could just go look that up, right? Because you've recognized the hole in your knowledge in the process of making items. And then you just go figure that out, and assuming it's relatively straightforward, you could figure it out. Maybe you could then say, oh, it primarily deals with automatic stuff, but not exclusively. So you could then make items out of that, right? And what's interesting to me there is this kind of thinking, structuring items this way. And I've been saying this to people for years, and I haven't done enough deep thinking about it. But thinking about information such that you can formulate items out of it deepens your understanding, because you have to think of it in this weird way. You're deepening your associations with it by way of making items from it. And I really think that's a huge value of making items from information, even if you never review them. I think the act of making items deepens your understanding and reveals places where you're missing information.
A really great point. Like, during the process of, like, noticing that the cardinality of the relationship would make it really difficult to have that item, and then, like, going on to Google about more information about it. That's like another way that the act of making items sort of improves your understanding of the world. Like, I think that's a really good point.
I think it's a really useful skill for that reason alone, even if you never review them.
Yeah, exactly. So another question where this was sort of expressed again is like, list the regions of the brain involved with automatic processing. And if you just have that question and you expect a list of all the regions involved with automatic processing as the answer, again, it's like a one-to-many relationship where the many could be like 10 plus items. And we all know, like, when you try and remember lists like that, it's just like, it's impossible. So rather than doing that, you sort of control the complexity of the one-to-many relationship in the in the example you give under it. You say, name an example of a brain region which is involved in automatic processing of information. And then in the answer, there's a list of 3 different regions, amygdala, basal ganglia, cerebellum. I hope I'm saying all those right. And then just one of those answers would count as getting the question right. And so you've turned it from a one-to-many into a one-to-one relationship between the question and the answer. And so I really feel like that's definitely something that I've struggled with in the past, just being able to formulate the question so you target like one answer, or like if there are multiple answers that could be possible, then you accept just one of them, because it's much easier to, I don't know, it's so impossible to remember these lists that you just always want to avoid them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it captures 3 things there. One of which is what you said, is it's really hard to remember the lists. Like, you can just try it for yourself. Just try to remember a list of 10 items or 12 items or 15. And if some years pass, it's really hard. But so that's one problem. Another problem is this is an incomplete list. I don't actually know every single brain region that deals with automatic processing. That snippet that I'm working from doesn't give me that information. So I simply don't have it. And another thing this clears up, and I think a lot of people miss this, and I certainly do on occasion as well. You have to think to yourself, when in life would it be useful for me to remember every single brain region that deals with automatic processing? Is there ever, does such a situation even exist? And I think the answer, at least for most of us, unless you're like a neuroscientist or something like that, the answer is no. Even then, I have a hard time believing that you would need to be able to list from memory every single region.
Man. This
you
is
have
so
to
funny.
think to yourself, is that list even useful?
It's so funny to hear this from someone who was homeschooled, because I immediately thought of exams. And I guess since you never had to do them, you just never thought of it. But the only, literally.
That's
the only time I can think of needing to know a list is in an exam, and that's why it's so frustrating. That we need to have formulation experts in charge of the exams, if we even have exams at all, because they don't understand the complexity of learning lists or like permutations or whatever. It's so difficult. And it's so like the cost is so high, and you try and explain this to a teacher, they will never understand. If you try, like, you wheel out your SRS like statistics and you show them like how much time you spent learning a list compared to whatever, they'll never get it. It's hopeless. So
Right.
Yeah, it's really annoying that I often see those like in chemistry or biology, you have metabolic pathways you have to learn, and it's just insane expecting someone to maintain like both. It's because you're remembering both information, like just some fact, but you're also having to remember the sequence as well, and I think that just increases the complexity so much. It's like it's very it's easily possible to remember facts from a book, but if you try to remember like the order of the sentences in the book, it's just impossible.
Yeah, exactly. And that, man, remembering lists is hugely difficult. It's funny because I actually didn't even think of the school example. Like you say, no one's ever asked that of me. I'll remember a list. That's happened to me 0 times my whole life.
Yeah.
So I didn't even think of it. But I guess that is a case. I mean, obviously, if you're talking about the usability of knowledge, that's separate from what's required on an exam. And to be frank, there are some situations where I could see memorizing a list actually being useful. You know, if you're a doctor and somehow you have to remember the symptomatology of some disease or something, I could see how that's actually useful. But, you know, in a way, it could be made into coherent information. And also, you've decided that you're willing to go through the effort to remember a list. And not everything's like that. But I think people make this mistake of assuming that every list they see that contains any valuable information is therefore worth being remembered in its entirety, which I think is just so stupid, dude. Nobody can list to you all of the, like, to give this example, nobody can list to you all the brain regions deal with automaticity, right? Yeah. That would be crazy. There are so many brain regions, and if you break it up into the sub-regions and all this, who's going to be able to list everything? Probably nobody. I mean, maybe a few people, but what's the use of it even? And that's one of my annoyances. When you add multiple components to an item, you're taking away the atomicity of it, which is reducing its utility in my view, because atomic items are like building blocks, and the bigger something is, the fewer things you can build with it. Right? Isn't that obvious?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I kind of don't like that.
Yeah. I think maybe part of it is that when you see a list, it's obvious, or it appears obvious to you where you should be putting the closes, you know? Like, if you see a list and it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then you know, then you're like, oh, this will be nice and easy for me to just pick closes by just closing the first one.
Dude, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I've been writing about this. I've termed it for now, and I don't really like this phrase, but I've called this hunting for closables.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice.
I think it's a disease. I think many are stricken by this ailment of continually hunting for closables.
Yeah, perfect. I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Especially when you're new, and if you just see a sentence, sometimes it is difficult to know where to put the close. But obviously, when you see a list, you're like, oh my god, yes, I can just close each line.
Yeah, and that's such an anti-pattern, dude. It's basically switching the focus of learning from actually learning and understanding things to what can I make items of?
Yeah.
Right? That's you don't want to think that. The primary focus should be, what can I understand? And then once you've captured a new piece of understanding, then make items. It doesn't matter what word is closable or what's not. It's about what can I understand, and of the things I now understand, what do I want to remember? I think many people are reversing this, and I don't think that's good. So yeah, I definitely think the closability of a list, it's so easy, it's so attractive if you just go, oh, look at all those items. There's 5 items in this list. I can make 5 closes at least. Yeah, and if I do overlapping closes, I can make 30 or whatever it is. Yeah. I hate those overlapping closes, dude. There's so many of those items. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Have you seen that Anki plugin?
Yeah. I've seen it.
There's so many items from one list.
Exactly. I think it is that one plugin that there are good uses for it. Well, good-ish. I mean, I remember like having to remember like speeches in school or whatever. Maybe if you have some presentation and you don't want to freestyle it. Although now I feel like it's better to freestyle. But if you really did want to remember like some important speech, using that style of overlapping closes is really useful, because when you're doing a speech, obviously the sequence the order of the words that you're saying is very important. So if you need to cram for a speech, then I would recommend you to go and use the close overlapper. But it's just like for most other situations, I just can't see it ever being that useful. Again, the only other
it's very rare.
The only other application I can think of is like learning a song or learning a poem. It's stuff where you need to recite it word for word, like in sort of a rote way. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I just want to make it clear, there are some valid use cases for remembering a list. And sometimes you literally have to in order to make the information useful. And I'm not saying it's never useful. I just think people really overestimate the average utility of lists. And they think that any list which contains any information would therefore be useful to remember completely, which I think is really silly. I think just reevaluate and go, when am I going to be asked in real life to remember this? And maybe if you're about to take an exam, you are, but beyond that, is this ever going to be actually useful? And again, there are plenty of cases, like you say, where you're trying to remember a speech where it would be, but most things it's just people deluding themselves and thinking, oh, this would be a useful item, or it would be really cool to be able to remember all these things. It's like, yeah, but are you really willing to dedicate all that extra time to it?
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, I have a gripe with lists.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to article number 2. I bet that's going to be the topic.
Dude, I have so many articles. I'm writing all these individual notes on formulation patterns. And one of the formulation patterns is identify words that are doing the job of images. I think this is also an anti-pattern that people employ, where they just, if something can be visualized, they just keep it in words anyway, because they're not trying to spot the words that are doing the jobs of images. So I'm trying to build up these individual formulation patterns in these atomic notes, and my hope is then I'll be able to master this list. And whenever I notice a new idea, I'll add another formulation pattern. And then just whenever I'm struggling with formulation, I'll consult this list and I'll figure out some pattern that works here. It's almost like design patterns for code, I'll just figure out some really pattern that works for this situation, and then I'll do it. And then I have anti-patterns as well that I have employed myself and I see other people employ. So I want to really work on that list. And some of the ideas are stolen from the 20 rules. But some of them are new. So hopefully the new ones will inspire people to write more about this. I really want people to do some more thinking about this. I really want to get better at this myself. I really want to not shy away from any information just because it seems difficult to make good items out of. And I really want to figure out the limit of all the different types of information that can be encoded in atomic items. And I don't feel like we're at that limit yet. I don't feel like people discuss this enough. And I hope that I can keep pumping out these articles and encourage the thinking about this.
Very nice. I think that's a good spot to end it. That was really nice.
I think so.
Very nice. All right. It's Golden Nuggets Podcast, episode 5, I think.
6, I think.
6. God damn it. All right. See you guys.
All right. See you.